Hello, I'm Mike Robertson and I'm the lighting designer for many of the projects for Atelier de Cultura in São Paulo in Brazil, the producers of some of the most excellent musicals going.
Estrelas brilhando, o amor nos quer brindar. O mundo é cruel e não quer ter violar. Vamos celebrar que cada é
CDF não tem nada a ver. Baby, algo lá fora. Rock é o caminho, rock é viver. E é nessa escola que eu vou crescer.
When I was very little, I was conscious that my father and all his friends were painters, some of them really very high-end professional painters, and I was very aware from a little age that I couldn't even draw a stick man. When we were very little, my brother maybe 5 and me 3, we went on holiday to Denmark in Scandinavia. We went to Tivoli Gardens. Within that, there were these beautiful glass sculptures. You could look up to the sky or the sun if you were feeling brave, and you could turn this and see the effect that the ripples on one piece of glass had against the flat colour on another piece of glass. It was fascinating. But it was also fascinating to look on the ground and see the patterns they made there. That I turned to my mother and I said, I can't paint, Mummy, so I'm going to do it with light. And that really, at that very early age, became my primary interest in lighting, and I've followed it ever since. I was lucky enough when we went to boarding school, my brother and I, a few years apart again, that they had just by sheer fortune happened to build a brand new theatre. So at a certain point I renegotiated with my headmaster and said, now this new theatre you built, I'm very interested in lighting, it's probably 11 by this point, so could I possibly go and work on that? And they made a little deal with me in their office and they said, okay, you can do that 2 or 3 days a week, but the rest of the time you have to work in the kitchens and you'll be taught how to do industrial catering. And for the rest of the time you'll have to work with the engineers in the boiler house and the electrics department. So I learned how to rewire a house or plumb in a boiler. Useful skills that have held me in good stead to this day. And within that I had my couple of days a week to start experimenting, start playing around with big, scary, heavy, hot, expensive theatre lights. So after we had finished at school at the age of about 18, there was a choice there to go to university and to study something proper, a real trade, a real job, a real grown-up kind of life, or to go to drama school. So my major was not, in fact, in lighting design because it didn't really exist as a subject in those days. What existed was a thing called technical stage management. So we learned show calling, we learned to paint backdrops, to make costumes, to run a soundboard, to run a lighting board, and on occasion we were allowed to design lighting for some shows. But by studying that multi-discipline, it taught all of us where we knew we fitted in with our specialist subject. When I came out of the Guildhall with my degree in stage management, work was just not coming. It was really, really hard to find. One day, with the spirit of the great gods on my shoulder, I went, right, I'm going to London to seek my fame and fortune. So I just packed a bag and took a bus, and 11 hours later I arrived in London, and for the next 6 weeks stayed on a friend's sofa and just went to interview after interview after interview. Now, I was very lucky because a very famous English playwright called Hugh Whitemore, his wife happened to be doing a one-woman show about Beatrix Potter. And the lady who was playing Beatrix Potter in this play was very well connected. She happened to be at a dinner party given by a man who later on would create a thing called the Ambassadors Theatre Group, which is one of the biggest chains of theatres in London. So she did some sweet talking, and a few days later I got a call to say would I like to go and start working on the musical Blood Brothers, which had been running for a few years at the Phoenix Theatre in London's West End. So when I joined that show, it had been running for quite some time, and it's fair to say that it was beginning to look a little bit tired and a little bit old. So the job came to me and my colleagues to make it look better. So we were given free rein to, within parameters, reinterpret the lighting of that. The show then ran for another 15 years, I think, and indeed still tours to this day. It's played on Broadway as well. So that was my first introduction to lighting musicals. And outside of the theatre, I've done many other forms of lighting. So I've designed the lighting for aeroplanes, and for trains, and for automotive parts. I've designed it for architectural projects, for gardens, for private houses. And then comes the internationals. Now that's where it became really interesting. So, for example, I did this opera production of The Magic Flute by Mozart. Now, what happened was that this caught the eye of the Harare International Festival of the Arts, based in Zimbabwe. And they very much wanted this production that was touring the UK at the time to go over to the festival. We played the opera to 20,000 people, sat on cushions in the grass in Harare Gardens, with the Queen of the Night appearing 100 foot high in a tree behind the stage. It was one of the most magical things I've ever done. Now, within that, two things happened. They said, could you maybe stay on and help us with some other shows? Because in those days, the skill base in that country was not nearly as high as it is now. So as part of the British Council Overseas project, they asked if I could do a little bit of training, a little bit of skills exchange. So I was very happy to do that. And whilst I was there, I lit a bunch of ballets, some plays, and indeed another opera. So the main point about that was that in my mid-20s by this point, it removed any anxiety I had about working in foreign countries, because it seems to me that everyone is trying to do exactly the same thing. They're just using different methods to get there. So it's very reassuring to know that the objective through the world is very similar, because the beauty of light is common to all man. And so at the age of 27, I think, off I went to Oslo to work on the biggest stage in Europe. With those earlier experiences, my passport to working on different kinds of work in different countries has been easy. With confidence and with people's kindness and with a growing reputation, you're asked to do this play for this person, and then perhaps that person recommends you to another person or to another theatre, or indeed to another theatre in another country, and with that spirit, on we go. Sometimes it's producers that call me for a job, sometimes it's directors that call me for a job, and sometimes it's designers who call me for a job. So the call can come in two ways, essentially. One planned and prepared, and the other one in a panic. So the panic one is quite interesting. Somebody, maybe their first choice has got ill or got another job and can't do it. So they go, oh, quick, who can we get? Let's see if Mike's around. Those are often great jobs, but there's very little time, or much less than normal time, to prepare for the project that you're doing. The more traditional approach is to ring quite a bit in advance. So, for example, if I'm doing a dance show in 2021. Now the call came for that in about 2019. And in terms of our beautiful friends at Atelier de Cultura, they can call with a year to go. So once the call comes, there are many strands to pulling together the final design. They begin with an analysis of the music, a knowledge of the fellow artists who are working on the piece, the script, the set design. Now, once all that's sorted, you then begin reaching out to your fellow colleagues on the show. Now, my two closest ones, generally speaking, are the director and the designer. Sometimes designers, if a show has a lot of video in it, then we should be talking with them as well. Chances are the directors had it in their heads for much, much longer than I have, so they may have some really strong views about how it should look or how it should feel. Now, the thing about the design is ultimately that's going to be the framework in which the lights are going to operate. If the conversation comes early enough, that the lighting designer can influence how the set is put together, not to change or subvert the ideas that the designer may have, but maybe if they just move this back by this much, or create this gap like this, or move this here, or maybe make that blue, then I can put some lighting in there or light it from here in a different way. So ultimately, in the end, what lighting design as a real day-to-day business is on the shop floor when you're doing it is a fight for space, because above the head of the actor there is only so much space and everyone is trying to put everything in there. The sound department wants speakers, the video department want huge projectors, the set people want huge amounts of scenery, and of course us lighting folk want a huge amount of lights. We must talk with the director and the designer about style. What period is it? How should it feel? So that is how the process begins. Second thing, I guess, is to build the team, to know that you're going to have a very good team around you to support the vision of the lighting. Now, the two key ingredients in that are the programmer and the chief or master electrician. Those are the two biggies to start with. The third one is the person who's going to build all the set electrics, all the twinkly bits that go into the scenery. That's a hugely important job too. One of the very best things to do is to go to the venue and measure it properly and sit in every seat in the house so that you can see what light might just be able to go in like that, what light could do that, what the limitations are when you're sat up the back of the very back of the theatre. Will you be able to see the stage if you drop the lights in to that point? All of those kind of things only really come when you know the venue well. So that site visit is essential, to go to measure and to make sure that all paperwork that's being generated, all plans that are being generated by the designer or indeed by you or given to you by the theatre are actually accurate. The key to developing any good team is communication, is the actual ability to speak with someone with no boundaries. Because if ego or misunderstanding are going to get in the way, then we're not going to get the best out of each other. We need to be absolutely laid bare, open as people, to be able to talk with complete candour and frankness, total openness to one another about what's going on. Sometimes shows really can be very pressured. There are millions of pounds, millions of dollars at stake in one of these things. And when things get hard, you can rely on the fact that you are friends and you have good, open communication. The second thing is very obvious, is that they have talent, that they're very skilled and quick at what they do. A programmer, for example, will have to make up thousands of lighting cues based on tens of thousands of instructions. Then, when you apply that we don't speak necessarily the language in which the project's being done, and we're also having to translate it at the same time, well, that's a big skill as well. So it's been a great fortune on the Brazilian shows to work with brilliant master electricians who speak wonderful English and wonderful Portuguese. So we don't have that tension. The information that's most important to me when we begin a new show is what is the text and what is the music. So let's say Annie, for example, how Annie was as a movie in 1980, whenever it was. Now the problem is, movie musicals are very different to stage musicals, and if you go into this journey relating everything back to your experience of that movie, well, that's a problem, because you're dealing with the wrong information. The information you need to be dealing with is the current script and the current music. I need from the producer's office a really up-to-date script with a very good back translation for me. The music is often very helpful in written form to actually be able to read the dots to see where the lighting cues might land in terms of which beat in the bar they might go. That's a very useful thing as well. And then, as we said, drawings. Costume's something we haven't really touched on yet, but that's absolutely essential too, to know that you are enhancing the look of people and beautiful costume designs rather than killing them with light that makes them look ugly or inappropriate. So good to see samples of fabrics and how they might light and how they might reflect. Lighting design is a fusion of creative and technical. There can be limitations in terms of the weight that you can hang on a particular bar. So yes, you may want to get the vision out, you may want 20 of these lights on that bar, but the weight may dictate that you can only have 12. So you have to make a way in which that can happen to your advantage and not cause any health and safety problems. Electricity is another one. Do we have enough power to feed all the lights that we're going to need for the show? Do we need to have a smaller number of lights? Physically, can all this stuff fit? One of the great things that's liberated lighting design down the years is that fixtures, automated fixtures and just standard static fixtures, by which we mean lights, have become smaller, cheaper, better and brighter. So they can do more things and take up less space, which is a fantastic way forward. Now, once you've got that rig up in the air and in the sides and from the front, then your creativity and your imagination can run free. The definition of creatism is to not allow the technical limitations to get in the way of the way you see the project looking. That's the very nature of creativity.
Se o mundo vira
As costas pra você,
se não tem mais saco,
que só obedecer. Grita, xinga e bate o pé, e dorme a hora que quiser. E mostra o dedo e rasga os giz e sai quebrando os camarins. Em frente quem tentar te censurar. Yeah! Exija seu direito de xingar. Yeah! Não deixa o mundo em volta te calar.
manda se ferrar, manda se ferrar, manda se ferrar.
Building something that initially peaks, drops, levels out again, peaks again, levels again, and then peaks massively towards the end, so that you're building an excitement. So I know that if we've got 10,000 twinkly lights on the set, that maybe if we just use 1,000 of them in the first minute, 4,000 of them just before the interval, then I know we've got all 10,000 to have at the end of the show. And even if that's just for a couple of seconds or half a minute, that to have held things back in reserve is to build a bigger dynamic towards the excitement of the lighting, the contribution it can offer to the show. So the biggest challenge I think I have faced in my career, and it's one that we face on a lot of shows, is time. If you want something to be really nuanced and really detailed and have a lovely rich feel about it, then there's no way that it can be done quickly. But that still means that you have to work very quickly indeed, even if you are going to put a lot of detail into it. So you're given maybe a week, if you're very lucky, to do some pre-lighting before you get the actors on the stage. So time is one of the greatest challenges. Working with people who have very different visions to you is another. One of the biggest developments is, of course, of LED technology. LED lighting is now becoming huge mass market stuff, and is also becoming a really realistic way to actually light people. We think about it in the old days, and you'd have a massive cyclorama, a huge backdrop on the upstage of a theatre show. It would take tennis court amounts of plastic filters, of gels, to be cut to go in huge, great big lanterns to get one big block of colour on the thing, red, let's say. It could take maybe 80 lanterns to do that. Now, with the average tungsten light having an efficiency of about, at best, 6%, I would think, by which I mean for 100% of the electricity going into a 1,000-watt light bulb, 6% of that is coming out as light. 94% of that is heat. So the gels, the plastic filters, are all melting and burning and have to be changed at great expense all the time. Now, LEDs don't have that problem. They run a lot cooler, and they can produce very rich and very detailed colours, and their running costs are tiny. So this is a great progress in many, many ways. There is an artificial angle to them. There is something not so human, not so sympathetic to skin tones, because we as human beings remain analog machines, and the two don't necessarily understand each other. There's something delicious and warm and relatable and understandable to a human being about the old inefficient light bulb that produces 94% heat for its pure 6% of light. But there's something rich and lovely in that 6%. But we can't go forward that way because the world needs its power back. We need to be producing less power and cutting down fewer trees and using less coal. So if LEDs that suggest a huge light output for a very small amount of electricity used is a good thing, then let's go with it. Other improvements really for us down the years, particularly in the last decade, is boards, lighting boards. The ability to program lighting boards has become more graphical and less mathematical. Also, that we can lay things down to backing tracks. We can, even though we always do live music in these beautiful shows in Brazil, on other productions in other countries, we have an element of the music which is on a backing track, and we can actually trigger all the lighting cues from this track that's playing underneath it. So essentially, what has been the greatest change in stage lighting in the last decade is efficiency. The idea that press night is the end is a really terrifying reality for a lighting designer. Now, the experiences 99% are absolutely joyful. And what I can never understand, my colleagues can never understand, is why we need to go home. It's because our job is really pretty much done to that point. But it doesn't seem fair somehow, because we've had so much fun and so much love with all the people that we just want to stay, quite frankly. Anyway, go we must. But entrust in your colleagues to check that the plastic gels, the filters aren't burning out, that they're being properly maintained, that the lights are being put back in place. Because one of the things we have to encounter, particularly on the shows we do in Brazil, is the theatres are very useful and very busy. So some of the times we don't have completely exclusive access to them. Sometimes other companies or a conference or something like that needs to go in and use our bit of set to do their presentation, which means that sometimes our scenery needs to move, some of our lights need to move, and so on. So entrusting your team, that wonderful team that you put together so many months before, trusting them from very detailed notes and very good photographs and verbal understandings, need to put all those lights back in the right place. Also, you can go back as the designer and check on something and think, really? Is that what it's supposed to look like? Or the reverse of it and go, wow, that looks really good. But also why you're never done with it is because to go back, and if anything's just slipping a bit, you know, not looking quite as tight as you remembered it, then that's the opportunity at that point to tighten it back up again and re-look at it. Also, maybe some of the ideas that you came up with in the first place, maybe you feel different about them now. And actually the way to make something smarter, better. The greatest advice I could give to anyone going into stage lighting now is patience and to develop a lifelong love of art. To understand paintings and to notice the world around you in all its detail, in all its natural and artificial and man-made detail. That to me is the great secret of design. Knowing, absorbing, observing. That's something that will hold you in great stead and allow your designs to be fresh and interesting down the years and not stuck to a formula. It's often said that the difference between a designer and technician is that they can look the same. The lights are placed in the same place, but the intention is different. I would say technically what separates the two is that a placement of objects is not in itself design. Designers would far rather prefer that the objects were placed badly or not as ideally as perhaps one would have hoped, but it's what you then do with them. And perhaps sometimes in the most minimal of cases, that a simple backlight here and a simple face light there with a little window glowing behind is the best and most thrilling picture that you can come up with, and its simplicity itself. Perhaps a more technical approach would be to go too far, to make the lights move too much, to change the colour too often. So a knowledge of art, a patience, and an understanding of taste are all essential. What you are going to do when you stick with this as a lighting designer your whole life is create hundreds and thousands of beautiful images that become memorable to children and adults alike, that take their memory to the very end of their days, and all because of the way you lit it.